Beautiful. Thank you. I love that song. I've always loved it. It's one of those anthem type songs, I think, for understanding how life works. See, we're all about figuring out how life works, right? And not only are we trying to figure out how life works, we're also trying to figure out how my life works. You notice that? Yeah. We know life works. It's kind of my life that I get stuck on from time to time. So today we are exploring further this idea of liberation, of freedom, of being fully who we are. And so we come to talk today about this idea that we are free to be ourselves. It seems to me that through the ages, the great spiritual teachers around whom we organized religions were all trying to teach us how to experience spiritual liberation. And so they came in knowing who they were, and they spoke to us in ways to help us understand who we are. To me, that's the essence that sits at the heart of all religious paths. Now, I also know that as traditions develop over time, we can move away from the teacher and create structures and systems and all that kind of stuff that may or may not reflect the original teachings. So I always like to go back to source. When we talk about learning from the master teacher in unity, we say this is Jesus the Christ, who was an enlightened soul who embodied the fullness of life. But we don't see him as exclusive. Rather, we recognize all religious traditions. So, what does it mean? We just affirmed that we enjoy living our authentic life. What does that mean? What does it mean to be authentically you? I mean, who else are you going to be, right? I think about this sometimes, and I think it's really quite an amazing thing that when you think about it, in the billions of years of life, there's only one you, unique in its own way. And that in this evolution of thought that became form, that became reality, you are a once-in-a-lifetime experience of the divine. You're thinking, I know, I'm all that. Now, before you get too full of yourself about that, so is everyone else, right? So it makes us not better or worse than anyone else, but it is that unique quality of who we are. Now, I grew up in a tradition that taught me that I was born from original sin. You know, have a great life, they said, right? That, I mean, when you think about that, sometimes I think about that as like, you know, you're inherently flawed. So it was a surprise to me when I found there was other traditions that said, you know, that's an understanding, that's a way of perceiving reality. But ultimately, I remember reading Matthew Fox in a wonderful book he has called Original Blessing. When we begin to see that our life is indeed a blessing, that we have been given an opportunity to express our divinity in form, in this wonderful world in which we experience all that we get to experience. And yet sometimes we forget who we are. Sometimes we begin to perceive that who I am is not enough. Who I am is flawed somehow. And so we begin to take on this idea that somehow we would be more lovable if we were just, you fill in the blank, it's your story, you know, I'd be more deserving of greater good if I would just be somehow different. And so we take on roles, we take on personas, because out of our evolution, we think that we'll be more lovable if we show up a different way. What I would suggest to us that each of us, if we are an original blessing, and a once and unique expression of the divine, then being fully who we are is the gift. And so I was talking with a friend about this not too long ago, and I was saying, something about bring forth your highest self, bring forth your greatest being. And she's like, what is that? What is my gift? Right? You ever ask that question? What is my gift? And he's like, here's a clue. What brings you joy? What brings you a sense of fulfillment? What are you good at? Those things that inherently bring us joy and a sense of fulfillment are our gifts. And the reason we miss it is because it comes so naturally to us. Right? And we also have grown up in a society that says you must struggle. You got to work hard to get ahead, and all that sort of thing, right? But what comes to us most naturally and most easily is really what our gift is. It's why we are here. It's as if, not like God said, hey, I'm going to plant this sunflower seed in hopes that it becomes a petunia. Right? No, it wanted that experience and therefore the seed. So within each one of us lies a seed of divinity, lies those spiritual gifts and qualities. And because of our mistaken identity, often we have a case of mistaken identity. We believed something to be true that isn't true. We believe that if we are a man or a woman, it'd be better. If we are tall or short, it would be cool. All of the things that we have said to ourselves that have enforced a belief system that says ultimately we are not enough. So I find that the work so often is really not so much about becoming something more, but releasing what isn't so. Right? Releasing those beliefs. I've never heard the toenail clipper analogy before, but I'll take it home with me because it made sense. I never think about it. I'm done, boom. So I like that. Thank you. Right? Here's what I know. We often seek completion outside of ourselves. Remember that great movie, Jerry Maguire? And they're in the elevator, and he says to her, or she says to him, I don't remember, you complete me. Now, my codependent self cries at that line. Oh, that's so sweet. My healthy self says, oh, that is gross. Right? Do you know what I mean? Right? Sometimes we go into relationship and think about what we say. This is my better half. This is my blah, blah, all these things. Because there is sort of that message that we've received that somehow we will be somehow more complete with another. And we will, as promised, live happily ever after. Because that's the rules. At least it is in fairy tales. Now, for the rest of us living in this world, we figure out, something else is happening. So it's a fundamental spiritual truth that we don't get to experience outside of ourselves what we first can't embody in our own consciousness. You see, I see this in the world so much. And I played this game for a long time. That I thought if I lived in the right place, or wore the right clothes, or drove the right car, then I would experience more fullness. So I went through a lot of places, a lot of cars, a lot of clothes, trying to get the right look, right? It wasn't until I realized, began in these teachings, that said, if you want to change your outer experience, then something in there has to change. So, that's an interesting concept. What does that look like? And I remember after I'd started doing some of this work and began taking classes and moving through my spiritual training and beginning to realize that who I am is different from what I do. Who I am is different from the thoughts that I have. Who I am is different than the feelings that I experience. Isn't that amazing? I'm not my feelings. I'm not my emotions. I'm not my thoughts. I'm not my body. There is an I am to who I am that has a body, that has thoughts, that has emotions, that does stuff, but it is not who I am. And when I began to perceive this and began to realize it, I realized, aha, it opened up a new passage for me. And I remember one time I was working, my dad had a company and he asked me to come work and manage his company, and so that was a good thing. It was a wonderful opportunity for both of us to sort of engage in a new level relationship. And for some reason, we were swapping cars around and reorganized because everybody was always traveling and doing this thing. And so this one particular day, I had the opportunity to drive. This kid that worked for us had a little love truck. Remember little love trucks? They're the little itty-bitty things, right? His was well used, let's call it that. So well used, in fact, that you had to get in on the right side because the left side had been bashed in. So, this was not styling. And so I drove that. I had a little Buick. This is nice. And then the other car was a Lincoln. And then my dad had a Mercedes with a cellular phone. Remember cellular phones? They're about $5,000 and about $2 a minute. He locked it. So over the course of the day, I had this opportunity to shuttle and move all these cars. And so I was in 4 different cars of various degrees of prestige. And at the end of the day, I realized I didn't feel different in any of them. That was a major revelation for me as how I had grown and evolved as a human being. Because there was a time when my ego wouldn't want to be seen in the love truck, but would have made it a point to be seen in the Mercedes, even if I had to fake calling on the cellular phone, right? You know what I'm saying? I mean, it was such a minor thing, and yet it was like, aha, I'm different. I'm different. I remember just having this revelation, and I realized that this is the work, that ultimately the work is about experiencing at an inner level first so that we can experience at an outer level. You see, the world does not teach us this, does it? We don't have commercials that say, listen, work on your self-esteem. And when you get that right, stop by our store and pick up some makeup. Right? You don't see that commercial a lot, right? It's all about you're inadequate, but you stop by, you try our makeup, our deodorant, our car, our whatever, life's better. Right? So we're bombarded by that message over and over and over. But people say, well, if I just fall in love with myself, won't I be arrogant? And I would say unto you, no. Because arrogance is just the flip side of this false humility. Right? It's like, oh, I'm not enough. Don't worry about me. Martyrdom. I'll be fine. I'll take care of it, right? Don't worry about me. On one side, and on the flip side saying, I'm so great, I'm so wonderful, I'm so important, I'm so powerful. They're just 2 flip sides of still not being truly who you are. You see, we could look to the life of Jesus when he didn't come in and go, Son of God here, make way, right? Just showed up in his humble and powerful self. And because of who he was, because of that relationship with the divine, because he recognized his oneness with the divine, Then people were healed in his presence. They heard words of inspiration. They heard things that lifted their heart and their mind to a greater reality. The Buddha taught us that our source of suffering is because of our resistance and our attachment. And so when we are resisting life, it creates suffering. When we are attached to life, it creates suffering. And so he said the way to liberation is to be still in the moment, to be present with what is, to bring our consciousness and our awareness back to the spiritual source of who we are and to live from that place. So both of them taught different forms of liberation. Now, many people say Buddhism is really not a religion, and I would tend to agree with that. It's more of a practice. And so I've always said I'm sort of a Christian with a Buddhist practice, right? You call that whatever you want. But it is that recognition over and over and over that who I am is magnificent because I am. I can do nothing to take away from it. And in truth, I can do nothing to add to it. And you say to me, well, then what's the point? If we're already perfect, why even strive? To say that you're perfect doesn't mean that you're done. Right? Because if you're not yet walking on water, if you're not yet healing those around you through your sure presence, if you're not yet at peace all of the time, no matter the circumstances around you, perhaps you're not done. Perhaps there is work to do. So I always look at this idea, it's a paradox in learning to love yourself exactly as you are right now, and then being willing to explore more of who I am, right? Who else can I become? You see, so often people want to get this, they're all trying to get this vacation or this trip. And the trip that everybody wants to get to is Someday Isle. You've heard of it, right? Someday Isle, when you get to Someday Isle, you'll be thin, you'll be happy, you'll be rich, you'll be lovely, right? And so we're all trying to get there. And then we discover that Someday Isle is right where I am, right here, right now. So, first of all, we want to recognize that we were born to be free. We were born free, we should say, and then we forgot. And that freedom is not and comes to us from an outer experience, but from an inner. I also think of Nelson Mandela spending all those years in prison and never allowing his mind to be imprisoned. So that when he emerged from jail and was asked to lead a nation, he didn't go at it from a place of resentment and revenge. He did work to have restoration, but it was from a place of peace, saying we need to come together. It's not about white power, brown power. It's about being in human community together, and so he led a nation. But he never let himself be imprisoned while he was in prison. Gandhi the same way. So we are free. We are born to be free. We're free of fear, free of stress, free of the past. We're free to be strong, wise, and perfectly unique. And then we're reminded that it's okay to feel fear. Anybody ever feel fearful? It's okay. I hereby grant you permission. Thank you. You're welcome. Right? But it's okay to feel fear, but then to choose to act anyhow. Right? That even when we're fearful, if we'll go ahead and take the action, then the fear dissipates and we move into a new state of being. I've taught a class for years and years. At some point, we'll get to do it here. And it's all about giving voice to the soul. Some people might call that a public speaking course, which for some reason creates fear in people's inner being, for some. Not all, obviously. But for some, it's more fearful than meeting snakes or, all kinds of stuff, right? And so in this process of learning how to do that, it's okay, just come up, stand, and let's start. And we celebrate the wins over and over and over, And then as people become more confident and they watch the confidence of the group, it just generates sort of this experience. So then they are able to get themselves out of the way to deliver the message. It's okay to feel fear, but still choose to act. To live the authentic life, we have to learn to listen to our heart, to listen to that intuitive self. You see, I think we have intuitive intelligence and logical intelligence. Right? There's a part of our mind that is logical and systematic and does wonderful things. That's good. It's good to have that. But there's also a part of us, and it's not unique to the psychic view, it's true for all of us, that we have intuitive capability, that we know stuff. Now, it's broken down by gender. Women have a women's intuition. Men are too cool for that, so we have a gut feeling. Call it what you will, right? It's still a knowing that's not logically processed. What I have found as my spiritual path has developed is that those have become more and more balanced. And actually, I listen more to the intuitive impression for guidance, because what the logical mind is really good at is figuring out why it won't work. You notice that? So you have this divine inspiration. Spirit is calling you to fill in the blank. It's your life. And then you're like, but I'm X number of years, I've blah, 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 right? So for me, it's if it's that spiritual guidance. And how do we know the difference? How do we know when it's just our divine self or whether it's the ego self? For me, that's part of the practice. But what I've noticed is the divine self never yells at me. Right? Never says to me, you should, anything. The divine self just opens a passage. Does crazy things, like says, you're retired, Marty, so why don't you check out this Unity of Charlotte? In a place you've never lived before, in a denomination in which you are not trained. That would be perfect. Now, could you see how a logical argument could be made against such a thing? And yet, here we are, right? So I have learned, you can come now or you can come later, but you will come, right? Somebody said beautifully that spirit will pull you or fear will push you, but you must go through that door. Right? So sometimes when we resist that intuitive capacity, gathering more data, gathering more evidence, trying to have it make sense, then something happens when it's really what we're called to do that'll push us through the door. So I've decided, stop arguing. I'm going to stop arguing with the divine. It doesn't really make sense to pray for divine guidance, receive it, and then tell the divine why that's not so. Right? It always annoyed me when people came in for counseling and did that. What should I do? I think you should do this. They go and do exactly what they were doing before. Excellent. So glad we had that time together. Really? So Steve Jobs said to us, said in this wonderful speech, he said, the most important thing is to have the courage to follow your heart and your intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. You see, when we begin to listen to that voice, when we begin to understand who we are and that we are here for a divine purpose. Now, the ego always wants to make that big, grand, and bold, right? That's the ego. But we're all here for a divine purpose. I am here to teach. I don't know why. I didn't ask for it. Sometimes I don't want it. And yet, my life works when I keep doing it, and it doesn't work when I try and do something else. So again, you surrender. What I've come to realize is that we need to let go of the human unknown to embrace the divine known. Say that again. We need to let go of the human unknown and embrace the divine known. Think about this. If we are one with universal intelligence, it knows everything. It knows how to create universe, planets, trees, flowers, you. So there is a divine known. And just because you don't understand it doesn't make it so. Just because you think it's a certain way doesn't make it that way, except in your life experience, right? I see sometimes people come in for a session to get clear on who they are, and they spend the first half hour talking about why it can't be. So you got to listen to that. Finally, you get to a place to go, okay, so what do you want? Who are you? Are you willing to be powerful? Are you willing to accept that you are co-creative all of the time, and that what is happening for you in this moment is a blessing, even though it's not comfortable, if it helps you to understand who you truly are? So if you see any time there's a challenge or a problem in our life, it's simply pointing to where our growth lies. Isn't that cool? I think it's cool, since I have a few of them. So we're letting go of our human unknown to experience the divine known. And then from that inner state of knowing, we bring into our experience that which is reflective. The Fillmores, in one of their wonderful books, wrote this: it is the law of spirit that we must be that which we would draw to us. If we would draw to us love, we must be love, loving and kind. If we would have peace and harmony in our environment, we must establish it within ourselves. You can go down the list. If we would experience prosperity, we must become abundant in our being. We must be abundant. Right? Now, I know it's always easier to try and fix other people. I get it. I get it. Spent a lot of years trying to do that. But ultimately, it's how do I need to grow? Who do I need to become? Where am I not seeing the divine in this situation? And that's where my work lies. So we must first become in consciousness what we would experience in our lives. And ultimately, I would say this to you. Give yourself permission to be you. To be fully, uniquely, and authentically yourself. I would invite you into that awareness. Let's pray. As we take this moment to simply anchor into that awareness of the one life, the one presence, the one power, the one divine being. And whether we call that God or Allah or presence or power, or the 10,000 other names. It does not matter. For there is one life, one power, one presence, one being that is the source and the creator of all that is operating through its creation. In the beginning there was the nothing, and then everything else flowed from that. As I remember the one, I simply know that I live, move, and have my being in this one. That the very life of God is operating in and through and as me. That the word of the divine is spoken through this word that I speak now. And as I recognize my oneness, it becomes very easy to speak this word of truth for all gathered here. That we are each divine emanations of the one living Spirit. Each unique, each powerful, each beautiful, each magnificent in our own way. And so there is nothing to overcome. There is nothing to fix. There is nothing in truth to heal. There is simply a truth that must be revealed. And so I speak this word of power as I recognize that Christ's presence in each and every person, that presence of wholeness that allows the revelation of health and well-being, that presence of divine abundance that allows us to experience a prosperous and well-lived life, that presence of divine love as the only reality. And I know that as we move into that awareness, we open our hearts and our minds to that, our relationships are healed, uplifted, and transformed. And it starts with that one relationship we have the most control over, the relationship with self. In this moment, we choose to love unconditionally, to accept fully the light, the dark, and all shades in between. We choose to recognize our own inherent divinity, to celebrate and live from that place. The Master said, "Let your light shine brightly, that you might be a light unto the world." That divine light is resident within us. And so we extend a blessing. We bless this spiritual community. We know that it is divinely guided. We extend that blessing to our brothers and sisters, for we recognize the oneness of all humanity. We accept peace on earth. We accept a world that works for all. And as always, we bless all priests, all rabbis, all ministers and teachers of every faith, for we know there are many pathways to the divine. We choose to honor and celebrate them all. In joy and in gratitude, and I simply speak this word of truth. I know it is operated on these spiritual laws to bring forth the highest good for all. And so in joy and gratitude, I simply allow it to be so, as together we say, and so it is.